Modulators are some of the most fun things to play around with in Ableton Live. And yes, I'm aware that Ableton Live is not the only DAW that has access to modulators, things like LFOs, shapers, etc. But I wanted to use this video to show you how you can use modulators to take any sound, like a drum sound, for example, like this, and turn it into something a little bit more interesting, glitchy, and fun like this. If you're new here, my name's Matt. I'm a music maker and educator, and I make tools and tutorials to help you master your music, find your sound, and create with confidence. Let's dive into the video. Okay, so at the start of the video, you would have heard this sound, which is the drum break we're gonna be using. And if we take a look down here in my device view, we can see this audio effect rack, which if I open up has a bunch of different effects in it. And if I turn this on, this is what this is doing to the sound. And again, the idea with this is just to show you how you can use modulators to achieve sounds like this by just playing around with attaching them to different parameters. To do this, I'm gonna go ahead and recreate kind of a version of what I've done here. So let's close up this audio effect rack. And to start with, I wanted to grab this particular drum break and give it some kind of tonal characteristic. So the easiest way that I thought to do this was by using Ableton Live's Resonators device, which allows us to add some kind of resonance to any sound, but not just at a particular frequency, also at kind of semitone or musically related frequencies as well. So for example, we're resonating the note C2 at the moment. I could engage these other resonators and resonate notes at some kind of different musical intervals to create a chord. But with the new Live 12.2 update, I can actually make it so each of these different resonators are actually linked to the scale of the currently playing clip, just by using this Use Current Scale option at the top. If I click this, all of the different note and pitch options now switch from the notes and semitones to scale degrees, where the scale degrees are relative to the note set here, which is relative to the root note of the scale of the currently playing clip. Let's go ahead and say, set this low pitch here to maybe +2, +5, +7, and then let's go ahead and set this last one to maybe -5. Why this is really good is because if I adjust any of these pitch parameters here, they're going to stay locked to the scale degrees. So for example, if we modulate these different controls, we know they're always going to be in key with the scale of the currently playing clip. Let's go ahead and get Ableton Live's LFO device, put it after the resonators, switch the waveform to something like random, and then set the rate to 8th or 16th notes. Then if I map this LFO to one of the pitches, it's gonna jump around and randomly move this pitch control within the range set by this kind of modulation amount. So we can, every 8th note, effectively change the chord that this resonator's device is playing. I could make it quarter notes instead of 8th notes. And then I could go ahead and duplicate this LFO 1, 2, and 3 times to attach each of these different LFOs, because they're generating different random values, to these different pitch controls in the resonators. Let's attach this second LFO to this second pitch control, third LFO to the third one, and the fourth LFO to the fourth one. And let's maybe change this third LFO to 8th notes, adjust the modulation distance on some of these as well. And so now we have this kind of randomly generating chords from this resonators device. We set this to 100% dry wet, we just hear the resonance. Now, of course, this is attached to the scale, so I'm actually gonna go ahead and set this back to E minor pentatonic instead of minor, because minor pentatonic is gonna give us less notes to play with, and it's gonna, generally speaking, sound a little bit more consonant as we're jumping between these different notes. I'm just going to adjust the ranges of these LFOs a little bit more, collapse them up, and let's group these LFOs together with the resonators device by selecting and pressing Command or Control and G, and take a look at maybe some other things that we could add to this to make it even more interesting. First off, to stop it from getting a little bit too hectic, let's go ahead and add a limiter right at the end. And then just to bring everything up, let's also go ahead and add an OTT just before the limiter, pull down the amount. Let's pull down the low frequencies as well and increase the time gently too. We could also go ahead and maybe get another LFO and map this LFO to the decay of the resonators so that this changes, and let's slow down the rate and let's set it to be up. So the decay kind of increases over time. And let's set the rate also to maybe 1 or 2 bars so that it does sync up with our tempo. So next, I want to add some kind of glitchiness to this. So I'm actually going to go ahead and add Ableton Live's beat repeat. Let's put that before this OTT. Now by default, it can be a little bit hard to kind of work with. It's a bit hard using these intervals and chance controls, and it gets a little bit weird and kind of unpredictable, but not in a pleasant way. Or it gets a little bit too predictable. And that's where we're actually going to use Ableton Live's LFO to once again make this beat repeat a little bit more unpredictable. I'm going to go ahead and switch the waveform of this LFO to bin, which basically just randomly goes between the lowest value and the highest possible value. Then I'm going to set the mode to remote, so we've got between 0 and 100%, and then you'll see this button on beat repeat that says repeat. If I trigger this repeat button, we're just going to trigger the beat repeat manually whenever that button is triggered. So what I want this LFO to do is basically just randomly trigger this repeat control, and that's going to be controlling this beat repeat. So let's pull down the chance all the way to 0% so that none of these controls have any effect. Let's go ahead and set the beat repeat to insert so that we don't pass the volume of the dry signal, and then let's map this LFO to the repeat, and let's maybe set this to say 1/8 notes as the rate, so that every 1/8 note we're randomly deciding whether this repeat value is on or off. And we can make it even more random by increasing this variation control so that the grid value, or the rate at which these repeats are played, varies every single time the repeat is triggered. Which sounds pretty cool if you ask me. Next, let's add something maybe a little bit more predictable. So I'm going to go ahead and actually use Ableton Live's Spectral Resonator for this. We're going to put this before the beat repeat. Again, the order of these LFOs doesn't necessarily matter, but let's make sure that they're kind of attached to the relevant effects. And with this Spectral Resonator, I'm also going to use the use current scale mode on this so that we can add resonances at notes that make sense. Now, again, I'm going to use the new Live 12.2 feature as well as the scale awareness, which is this quantize feature, to quantize the harmonics that are being generated by the Spectral Resonator to the currently playing scale, which is a really cool effect. And then I'm going to set it to granular mode, which is just going to change it from these kind of static harmonics to this kind of weird bleepy bloopy thing. Let's increase the unison and then turn down the dry wet. And what I want to do is have this dry wet triggered at basically the exact same time every single 2 or 3 bars so that we get something a little bit more predictable. And for this, instead of using LFO, I'm going to use Ableton Live's Shaper. So Shaper is basically a custom LFO. It's free running. It allows us to just have a custom shape that re-triggers or loops in a particular cycle based on this rate control. There's also some other options, for example, like one shot and manual, but we're going to stick it on loop. And I'm going to map this Shaper to control the dry wet of the Spectral Resonator. Let's set the rate now to maybe 3 bars. So every 3 bars, I'm gonna have this increase over time, but instead of it just increasing, I'm gonna have it start basically all the way down here at the lowest possible value. Let's click this mod, make it unipolar and go all the way up to 100%, or maybe more like 70 or 80%, and then have it increase over this portion and then have it all the way up here. So we now have this kind of repeated pattern of this increase in dry wet on this Spectral Resonator device, which is giving us this interesting but repeated and predictable somewhat effect. Maybe I need to increase that just a little bit, and maybe let's just make it so it's every 4 bars instead of every 3. So now you can hear that every 4 bars, we have that kind of granular aspect of the Spectral Resonator coming in. Let's change it back to 2 bars, and maybe let's pull down the modulation amount so that we're not at 100%. And then we could also look at attaching LFOs to maybe some of these other parameters. For instance, let's grab an LFO and attach this LFO to the decay of this Spectral Resonator, but pull down the depth and maybe pull down the rate and potentially make it, I don't know, stray instead. So we just have this kind of random adjustment applied to the decay of these little glitchy, bubbly, beepy, bloopy sounds. And this is really the concept here, which is just finding these interesting effects, finding these interesting parameters on these effects, and then applying some kind of randomized or semi-predictable modulation to these effects to turn any sound into basically anything else that is really randomized, that sounds kind of cool and glitchy, and maybe that you can use to inspire your own productions. Now, of course, there are so many different things that we could do with this. So let's maybe go ahead and add like a reverb just after this beat repeat so we can give this sound some space. Let's also just turn on the maximizer of this limiter a little bit. Turn down the decay of that reverb. Let's add an EQ to just clean things up. And let's just add a glue compressor so that we can catch some of those peaks maybe before the OTT. And then all you need to do is put a beat underneath this, loop it, and you've got something really cool as a bit of a starter for a song. Some other effects you could use, which are some of the effects I used in the initial example for this, are things like Ableton Live's shifter device. You could attach an LFO or a shaper to the dry wet control. You could also use something like Ableton Live's spectral time device. Things like phases, flanges, choruses, and filters also all work really well for this technique. But anyway, I hope that inspired you to have a little bit of fun playing around with modulators in Ableton Live or whatever DAW you're in. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, make sure to click the like button, subscribe if you're new, and head to matttinklermusic.com/sign up to get regular tips and tricks delivered directly to your email inbox. Check out this video right here for some more sound design tips and tricks and inspiration. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. Stay awesome, and I'll see you all in the next video.